You're listening to Drug Positive, the risk reduction and benefit enhancement podcast, reducing shame and stigma to save lives and end the drug war.
Hi, I'm excited to have this chance to tell you about a machine invented in my lab that can make small molecules, like a 3D printer for molecules. All the user has to do is load the right building blocks onto the machine and press start on a computer, and the machine will build the molecule one building block at a time. The vision for the future is that anyone who needs a specific small molecule can essentially print it out from their computer. A new company has already licensed our technology and is investing heavily in developing next generation molecule making machines that will be much more powerful, scalable, and general. Achieving this goal could do for chemistry what 3D printing did for engineering, make it fast, flexible, and accessible to everyone.
What you just heard is real. That was a promotional video of Dr. Martin Burke from the University of Illinois in 2015 describing molecular printing. They're actually doing it. We can now use machines to combine atoms into complex molecules, meaning we can essentially 3D print drugs. How quickly this technology develops and whether the cost of the new machines becomes low enough that the average consumer can afford one is yet to be seen. But given the escalating rate of technological development from AI to nanocomputing, it's not far-fetched to think that one day soon, perhaps 10 years from now, maybe 20, you and I will be able to print our own drugs from home. How about that? No shady dealers to deal with, no worries about adulterated or contaminated product. We're talking pure drugs, whatever you want. LSD, 2CB, cocaine. Think about it, pure cocaine. And just a click away. Wouldn't that be great? Print just enough drugs for your own personal use. Don't try to sell them. Why would you? If everyone could afford a molecular printer and the atomic building blocks to print their own drugs, there wouldn't be much profit trying to sell drugs to others. If people could just download the blueprint for any drug they want from the internet, plug it into their own machine and print it out, why would they spend extra money to buy drugs from you? Okay, maybe not everyone will own a machine or want to figure out how to use it. Perhaps there's maintenance costs. Maybe they break down. There's potential for mistakes, I guess, for accidentally creating a virus that leaks from the reaction chamber and infects your entire family. Oh, wait a minute. A virus is alive. Or at least some people think so. Others say not really. They have to hijack a host's DNA. But maybe these machines won't be able to create viruses. But whatever. Maybe they're just not that easy to use. Maybe they require a college education in chemistry, say. Of course, that means some people might still sell drugs that they print, and other people will buy them. But the point really is just that a time is coming when it's going to be so easy to produce drugs and sell them to others that the drug war is going to become obsolete. That enforcing a ban on drugs is just going to be impossible. Oh, wait a minute. That time has already arrived. What I want to convince you of, what this episode is really all about, is that we don't need to wait for molecular printers. The technology that we already have today, that millions of people are already using, has made it so cheap, so easy, and so risk-free to manufacture, buy, and sell drugs that enforcement has become a joke. Truthfully, banning drugs has never been even remotely possible, but now it's just a joke. I mean, I would really hate to work for the DEA today or be on some city's anti-drug task force because the technology we have today makes it so easy, so simple to make, buy, and sell drugs. It's pretty much like having a molecular 3D printer at home. I'm talking, of course, about the darknet, about Bitcoin and other anonymous cryptocurrencies combined with the Tor browser and the world's postal services. Come on, you know about this already. You use Dream Market or other darknet marketplaces already. Or if you don't, you buy your drugs from someone who does. Maybe you don't even realize you do, but there's a good chance that if you use psychedelics or MDMA or synthetic stimulants or benzos, your drugs at some point were sold over the darknet. This is less the case with heroin and cocaine, which are still largely controlled by organized crime using traditional trafficking networks involving actual human beings. And it's less the case with poor or lesser educated people who don't have the ability to get on the darknet and use it safely. But for most middle-class people who comprise the vast majority of drug users and who use the vast majority of drugs, those drugs today are being produced in home laboratories and are being sold virtually risk-free over the darknet. When I met with the Drug Czar's office in 2015, I was there with Dee Goldsmith, founder of the Amend the Rave Act campaign, to talk to them about exempting harm reduction services from the Rave Act, or the Illicit Drug Anti-Proliferation Act, this terrible law that you should go look up right now if you don't know about it. Anyway, when I was there meeting with the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, I spoke to Katie Carditis in the hallway. She was a high-level staffer at the time, just below the Drug Czar himself, and she told me how bewildered and flabbergasted they were because of the darknet. There's simply nothing they can do. They can't open every piece of mail that goes through the Postal Service, not to mention UPS and FedEx. If they do find the odd package with some drugs in it, there's no use in raiding the buyer's house because the buyer can't help them find the seller. The seller is anonymous. The buyer doesn't know the seller. Most of the time, they just confiscate the package and send the buyer a letter saying that they've done so, hoping to scare them out of buying drugs again. But it's not like they start monitoring all the mail that comes to that person's house. That would be a total waste of time. There are millions of people around the world buying drugs off the darknet, and thousands of people selling them, and very few people get caught. We're talking 0.0001%, probably less. I mean, there's drug users everywhere now taunting the authorities by singing, "Nanny, nanny, boo-boo, can you do this? Nanny, nanny, boo-boo, yes, I can." It's that easy, people. Of course, some people have gotten arrested. Buyers who buy a lot of drugs at once, for example, got to be careful doing that. If you're unlucky enough that your package gets randomly opened and they find a lot of drugs and they think you're reselling them, then they might do what's called a controlled delivery. They pose as a mail delivery person, knock on your door, and when you accept the mail, they whip out a warrant and search your house, hoping to find a bigger stash of drugs and charge you with dealing. So if you're using the darknet, that is something to be careful about. And then there have been some dealers who've gotten busted too, but in all those cases, they made silly mistakes that gave away their identities. Take Ross Ulbricht, for example, the founder of Silk Road, one of the first darknet drug markets. Some say he wasn't a drug dealer, since all he did was manage the marketplace, but that seems like nitpicking to me. At a minimum, he was a drug broker. But anyway, his mistake was using a similar pseudonym and similar language in a public post as he did when he was using his encrypted Silk Road account. So they were able to put two and two together and say, this sounds like the same guy. Then they started monitoring him, and eventually they caught him and busted him. Now, Ulbricht is serving 2 life sentences, and recently he started tweeting from prison. Yeah, his friends and family have launched a website, freeross.org, where they're calling for his release. They're posting tweets that he dictates to them from his prison cell, and they started a change.org petition that's got almost 100,000 signatures already, calling for clemency for Ross Ulbricht. What do you think? Should he be released from prison? I mean, the guy was given 2 life sentences for a non-violent drug offense. That could be unprecedented. The feds were probably trying to send a message to the other darknet market administrators or would-be admins, but of course, we know that doesn't work. The number of darknet markets just keeps growing. When you can become a millionaire overnight, there will always be people willing to take that risk. And we've always had drug dealers ever since drugs got banned. And now the risks are even less. So sticking Ulbricht with 2 life sentences has had absolutely no effect on the marketplace. Is there a reason he deserves 2 life sentences? And it's not just him. Why do so many nonviolent drug offenders get harsh sentences, harsher than many rapists or murderers? Can you answer that? All right, don't get me started. I'm not going into this right now because I could talk forever, but this show is about the darknet. So we have a situation now where pretty much anyone who can read, understand instructions, and who has a computer and can get some Bitcoin, install the Tor browser, then they can buy whatever drugs they want virtually risk-free. And they're doing it. And the implications are astounding. Okay, what are those implications? First, there is a lot more people using drugs today. More people, in fact, than ever before. As we'll hear later in the interview segment of this episode, LSD use is at an all-time high. And, that's probably a good thing. LSD's benefit to risk ratio is super high in favor of benefits. And increased LSD use is clearly a direct result of the darknet and how easy it is to ship LSD without it being discovered. Yet, at the same time, heroin use is also at an all-time high. And that's not such a good thing. Even though most people who use heroin do it non-problematically, the ease with which people can now buy heroin through the darknet is making it more available to people who do get in trouble with it. The same for synthetic opioids. Norcos, Vicodin, pharmaceutical as well as illegally manufactured, are now easily available on these markets. And that's problematic. Maybe some libertarians think that's not a problem at all because to them, it's all about individual responsibility. And if you can't be responsible with your drug use and you get addicted, well, that's your own fault. I'm not in that camp, though, and I'll tell you why soon. But first, there's another negative consequence of the darknet, and that's the rise in fentanyl-related poisonings. Drug fatalities are at an all-time high, and by far this is being driven by fentanyl. And the darknet has played a major role in this. We can't deny it. It's so easy to buy fentanyl and its analogs over the darknet that people are doing it. Then they're lacing other drugs with it, especially heroin and cocaine. Why cocaine? Well, you can listen to our episode 3 for that discussion. But it's happening, and it's a major problem. And the darknet is allowing it to happen on a grand scale. To the credit of Dream Market, last spring they banned the sale of fentanyl and its analogs, and other markets have done the same, but not all of them. They've done this even though it's not their fault that people are using fentanyl to adulterate other drugs. They're just trying to be responsible, because there's assholes and idiots out there. Murderers and dumbshits putting fentanyl into cocaine and heroin, or into counterfeit Vicodin tablets, which is what killed Prince. Fentanyls are just too dangerous, too easy to be used as a contaminant in other drugs, that these market admins don't want to be responsible in any way for the people who are dying. Good for them. And let's be clear. The people dying from fentanyl aren't the people purchasing it and using it knowingly. Fentanyl, like all drugs, can be used responsibly. The problem is that assholes and idiots are misrepresenting fentanyl as other drugs, or putting it into other drugs and not telling people. And just to remind you, you can buy fentanyl testing strips to test your drugs for fentanyl before you take them on the DanceSafe website. Go to dancesafe.org. If you or someone you know uses opioids or cocaine, please buy some test strips. Of course, the fentanyl crisis is not solely the result of darknet markets. And in a very real way, the markets and their admins are not responsible for fentanyl deaths. Ross Ulbricht was not convicted of murder because he didn't murder anyone. Drug dealers even are not murderers, except the ones who are, because you can murder someone by selling them drugs laced with fentanyl. Although I'm sure most people selling fentanyl-laced drugs don't know they're laced and aren't trying to murder people. But the fact remains, the darknet is producing consequences that any good society needs to understand and deal with. It's not the solution to prohibition. It's not the be-all, end-all of drug policy. There are tons of good things about the darknet, tons. But unless you're a libertarian who thinks that every product, no matter how dangerous, should be available to anyone who wants to buy it at any time without any regulations, then, like me, you don't see the darknet as a full solution. Maybe it's because I've raised kids and I have friends who've lost their children to overdoses. Maybe it's because I think there are ways we can regulate drugs that both allow adults safe legal access, but also prevent the more addictive drugs from getting into the hands of children. Maybe it's because I think we can protect civil rights and cognitive liberty while also preventing the worst case scenarios that result from prohibition and unregulated markets. Look, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I get that. But maybe we want background checks for buying some guns, and maybe we want to require gun safety courses. Maybe we want to regulate guns to keep them out of the hands of children, dozens of whom die every year after getting a hold of a gun and then accidentally shooting themselves or their siblings or friends. It's not a slippery slope from regulation to total prohibition. And likewise, it's not a slippery slope the other way around for drugs. If we end total prohibition, it doesn't mean heroin's going to be available in 7-Eleven. There are ways to regulate drugs to maximize their benefits and reduce their risks and availability, depending on the drug. And darknet markets where any drug in any quantity is available to any teenager instantly who wants to buy it is just not the answer. Oh boy. Maybe I shouldn't have brought up guns. That's a Pandora's box, and really it's an issue I've stayed away from. And maybe the metaphor doesn't even work. There's huge differences between guns and drugs, and I'm not trying to equate them. I'm just pointing out that it is possible to regulate drugs in a way that reduces the vast majority of drug-related fatalities and harms, and that neither prohibition nor a libertarian crypto marketplace with no regulations at all are the way to do it. To be honest, I don't even know whether guns can be regulated in this country. There's no country in the world as saturated with as many guns as we have here in the U.S. And politically, we are so divided around the gun issue. But here's the thing. We're not divided around the drug issue. Despite Trump and Sessions, the majority of both Republicans and Democrats are solidly against the drug war and want to regulate drugs in sensible ways. So forget I brought up guns. This isn't gun positive. This is drug positive. So I'll keep talking about drugs. Not to mention, I probably pissed off both sides of the gun control issue by now. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, libertarians. Look, maybe I have a naive belief in the ability of Americans to come together to regulate drugs, to provide, say, free heroin to addicts like they do in Switzerland, or allow head shops to sell mushrooms and LSD, or to license venues or dispensaries to sell MDMA to customers who take a brief course in drug safety. Maybe this ain't never gonna happen because we're too much of a cowboy culture, too individual responsibility oriented, and too anti-government regulation. I mean, America's fairly unique in this way, settled by pioneers fleeing oppressive governments in Europe and steeped in the mythology of the Wild West, of the ability to lift oneself up by one's bootstraps. Maybe coming together to regulate drugs sensibly still feels like a nanny state to all these John Wayne watching, cowboy-loving, individualist libertarians who want to get the damn government off their back. Okay, I'm making fun of them, but I shouldn't really. Actually, I like libertarians. Some of them are my best friends. Truthfully, there's a lot of them in the drug policy reform movement, and I've had to learn to work with them. And some of them have got me thinking that maybe I'm naive, that government will always be so corrupt that we can't trust it to do anything good. When I say, but wait, governments can sometimes do the right thing. We can have influence over our representatives sometimes if we just organize and get enough people to make demands. When I say this, the smarter ones often come back with, oh yeah, when has that happened? And I have to admit it's rare. The corruption today runs really deep. I get it. But look, let's look at the reasons why. Let's start with Republicans. Too many Republicans, and certainly those exemplified by Donald Trump, see laws as if they're dictums or commands on how they want their subjects to behave, or how they think we should behave. In other words, they're authoritarians. And like libertarians, they see all behavior as resulting from individual actions, where individuals bear the sole responsibility for what they choose to do and the repercussions in society. Oh man, my libertarian friends are going to hate me for comparing them to authoritarians, but in a way it's true. They share a fundamental perspective that sees agency and responsibility solely in terms of the individual. They're both solidly inside the cowboy culture. Rather than using behavioral science to look at populations and how particular laws might affect people's behaviors within those populations, they see individuals as little agents only, making their own decisions by themselves. They want to libertarians want to maximize the freedom of individuals to do what they want, so long as they don't impinge on the rights of others to do whatever they want, right? That's the libertarian mantra. Whereas Republicans, or let's say conservatives more generally, they want to dictate to individuals their own moral positions and tell people you can't do X, Y, and Z, regardless of whether anyone else is harmed. They both, libertarians and conservatives, in this way, see laws only as orders or commands telling people what choices they should make. The idea of coming up with a set of regulations using social science that we know will result in modifying the behavior of whole populations to increase the public good, this just simply doesn't register with people who are so solely focused on morality or individual choice. You know, it also might seem Orwellian to people, right? Propaganda campaigns to exert mind control over the population or something like that. And I'll be the first to admit that such mass-scale manipulations are being done. Maybe not as much as Alex Jones wants us to think, but fake news and marketing campaigns designed to influence mass opinion and behavior, they do happen all the time. Just consider the public relations industry. But what I'm saying is that seeing the role of government through the lens of social science and public manipulation isn't always nefarious. Social marketing campaigns, for example, such as those from the 90s aimed at getting people to wear condoms to prevent AIDS, those were successful precisely because they utilized social science and marketing techniques. Here's another. The crying Indian commercial from the 70s. If you're too young to remember it, you got to Google the crying Indian commercial. A lot of people don't understand this, but before this commercial, people in our country would literally throw their trash out the window when driving. My parents would do it all the time. It was the norm. And it's still the norm today in many developing countries. There's no natural consciousness in human beings against pollution. And fines alone didn't solve the problem in the U.S. So it took a mass propaganda campaign, the crying Indian commercial, to be shown over and over again on television, combined with fines, to change culture and get people to stop tossing their trash out the window of their cars. Similarly, if we understand the social science of drug use and drug abuse, we can create proper social marketing campaigns combined with proper laws that lead to more responsible, safer drug use. We can end this overdose crisis. We can save lives. We can. And the way to do that is by stopping the shame and stigma. Stop demonizing drug users and drugs. Start putting out truthful messaging about how drugs can be fun. We know they can. How they have benefits, and that they're risky. And here's a way that you can be responsible and use more safely if you choose to use drugs. Combine this with laws that provide safe ways for people to obtain pure drugs. We'll put cartels out of business, reduce the demand for substitute drugs like K2 that won't show up on employers' drug tests, but that are way more dangerous to take. If we decriminalize drugs to free up public discussion and harm reduction services, if we do these things, we can solve the drug problem, or at least the prohibition problem, which is most of the problem. Can we do this? Are we capable of doing just some of this? Maybe. But to do so, we need to embrace social science, rather than just looking at individual actions as if they exist in a vacuum. We need to change culture, because the truth is, we are all a product of our culture, and drug war culture is killing us. Okay, so today's interview happens to be with the author who wrote the book on the darknet. What a coincidence, right? Amazing. His name is Mike Power, and he's an investigative journalist in London. His book is called Drugs Unlimited, or Drugs 2.0, as the British version is called. And He recently wrote a fascinating piece for Mixmag where he went undercover into a Chinese MDMA precursor factory pretending to be a big-time dealer. We put the link on the episode page of our website if you want to read it before you move on to listen to the interview. It's way cool. It reads like a spy novel, and you'll learn a lot about why MDMA is so cheap today and so readily available. But you'll also learn about this just from listening to this episode. It's actually just the first half of the interview. The second half we put on our Patreon page for our subscribers, who we love and appreciate. For $3 a month, our Patreon subscribers, including you, can get access to not just part 2 of this amazing interview with Mike Power, but also all the episodes of our other podcast, Drug Nonsense, where we critique drugs in the media. Just go to patreon.com and search for Drug Positive. Okay, but before we talk to the world's expert on the dark net, I know you were all eagerly waiting to hear from my co-host, the beautiful, talented love of my life, my wife and partner, psychedelic artist and dissident muse, Tatiana Makovkin! Woo-hoo!
Thank you. Sit down, everybody.
How you doing, baby?
I'm doing well.
Good. What did you think of the way I introduced you there?
This is where we differ. I would like to manage expectations more.
I was thinking about introducing you that way every time. I mean, you're the best.
I would rather decrease the expectations. It's a lot of pressure.
I think you're amazing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. That's sweet. So it's our 10th episode.
Number 10.
Yeah.
That's great. Not counting episode 0.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's going well. We're learning how to handle the workload, which is a lot more than we realized.
Everything's getting better. We're adding more color to the podcast. We got more sound design happening. I really spent a lot of time on my opening rant, my opening monologue this time.
Yeah, I'm enjoying watching you find your voice with the opening monologues and the rants. And
yeah, well, part of it was being on the Duncan Trussell show last week.
Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast.
He's just such a natural. He does these long opening rants, and I don't even think he outlines them ahead of time. He just kind of talks.
He's truly a wonder. He really has a skill.
Right. Comedians, man. They're the people that just know
verbal
how
gymnastics.
To talk and entertain people.
Yeah.
So mine's a little more intense.
Well, you have a message, right? Like you're on your soapbox.
Yeah, right. I hope it comes off as entertaining too. But yeah, definitely I'm have something to say here. Maybe you should build me a soapbox.
Maybe I should.
Where did
I think if
from?
I do, I'm going to make a bubble machine is going to be inside it. So you have bubbles coming up around you, standing up on a box.
We need to end the drug war.
Yeah, we can.
Where did the soapbox thing even come from? Like, why is that the thing you're supposed to stand on?
No, I think it's a real thing. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it was the Dr. Bronner's founder. Because he had all these religious messages along with his soap.
Right. David Bronner's was his grandfather?
Yeah, I think he was going out and literally, he was selling his soap and preaching and standing up on the soapbox too.
Dr. Bronner's soap is like the only reason why the soapbox is now a symbol of like a proselytizer.
I could be wrong, but I believe I heard a podcast about it one time, a history podcast.
Interesting.
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I could bring the soapbox to festivals.
Yeah. Just carry it around with you anytime you need to jump up on your soapbox. Just
maybe we should buy one for Halloween.
Yeah.
We're going to Halloween, everyone.
Florida.
That's right. It's the largest festival that Dance Safe staffs booth at in Florida. It's on it's in Live Oak, Florida, on the historic Swanee River. We're gonna be able to swim during the day.
Historic river. That's funny. I mean, what can be more historic than a geographic?
A lot
feature?
happened on the Swanee River. They've even made songs about it. Alligators. A lot of people got eaten on the Swanee River.
Yeah,
a lot of treaties have been signed on canoes on the Swanee River.
Oh well, I'm gonna have to educate myself about the Swanee River.
I don't know if any of that's true. But as a kid, I remember hearing that song and always thinking, wow, it's really important river. People sing about it, you know.
That's cute.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. You know, you're going to be staffing a DanceSafe
I
booth.
will. It's actually my first time to work for DanceSafe.
Yeah, very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I really love the DanceSafe community. All the volunteers are always such great people.
Don't condemn drug users when they come up to talk to you now. Okay, you gotta
I will never condemn.
non-judgmental.
I will never ever condemn. I won't be condemning anyone.
Great. Well, I'm going to bring my recording equipment too. You know, I've got a lot of shifts in the testing tent. We're going to be doing drug checking, and going to set up the recorder in there, and you know, ask people, hey, would you mind if we do this process live? And don't have to use your name. You can be anonymous. But maybe in an upcoming episode soon, we'll air some live pill testing results.
Yeah, I bet there will be some interesting conversations. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Who knows what you'll find? Or
I also have to say, I am so looking forward to seeing my favorite band at Halloween. They are called Dr. Dog. They are not an electronic music band, everyone. You know, I'm the DanceSafe founder, but I've always maintained a preference for guitar-based music. I think Dr. Dog are like the new Beatles. They're amazing, so I'm really excited about that. Who are you most excited?
I'm excited about Jamiroquai.
Jamiroquai.
Yeah, I want to go dance to Jamiroquai. Yeah. Really excited. And String Cheese Incident is playing. A lot of people are really looking forward to that. They might even play with Jamiroquai.
There's a rumor that they're going to do a set together. Yeah, a lot of people are going to explode in orgasm when that happens. The theme this year at Halloween is space creatures. So, you know, I haven't bothered to put any kind of costume together. And I know you've been talking about it. Did you find something?
I don't have anything in the space creature theme. Like, honestly, like most of the masks and headdresses and things that I have are like forest creatures. I'm very earth oriented. So I'm not sure and also we're traveling. So something lightweight, but maybe like, maybe something that sticks up. Maybe something on a pole. You know, that could be good.
Do you have your globe hat?
I do have my globe hat.
Bring that one.
Yeah,
that's great.
Maybe that would be
good. Put like an antenna on top of it. She cut a globe in half.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And put a strap on it. So she's got like the upper half of the earth on her head.
Come to think of it, that's a perfect idea. Yeah. And then we could have things like sticking out the top of it. And I also think that something on a pole would be a good idea. We could try to get a pole when we get to Florida, and we could have something we stick up on there, and that's always fun out on the dance floor. Stuff like up above the crowd, and then we can find each other.
All right, tomorrow we fly to Florida. Halloween, here we come.
Yep.
Way down upon the Swan River, far, far away, there's where my heart is burning.
Weed is legal in Canada.
That's right. Yay for Canada.
Good news.
Completely legal federally. You can now buy cannabis in retail outlets throughout the country. Maybe, I don't know if we've ever told people, but we are going to be moving to Canada at some point in the near future, next 4 years after our son graduates high school.
Yeah, British Columbia.
Most likely, we're thinking either Vancouver or Victoria or maybe Nelson.
Yeah, let us know if you're from Canada or if you know Canada. What do you think? What's a good spot?
We love BC. We love the climate. So where should we move to when we move to Canada? Let us know. You can write us at drugpositive@gmail.com, or you can call us and leave us a message. Our phone number is 530-DRUG-GUY. 530-DRUG-GUY. Give us a call.
We're actually going to be visiting Canada soon, over Christmas and New Year's. We're going to be up there.
Yeah, we're flying
Western part of Canada.
We're flying into Calgary, and then from there we're going to take a road trip to Saskatoon, and then we're going to fly out to Vancouver and stay with our friend Laura, and then fly home from there. We have a 2-week vacation, winter vacation. Part of the idea was to, see what Canada's like in the winter, because I've never been there and in the winter. And if we're really going to move there, we should go there and see what it's like during the worst season, right?
I don't really think about it that way. Nothing's going to change my mind. My dad came from Canada. And his whole family was there on their way through a long circuitous migration around the globe. And so I'm actually the first generation to be born in the U.S. And I think I just want to retrace my steps and do a do-over, get back to Canada. That was fine. We didn't need to come here.
I think your grandparents came from China, right? They fled Russia. They went to
Russia,
China.
To Harbin, China,
Yeah.
to Vancouver, and then to San Francisco.
Let's stop at Canada. I don't think I want to move to China.
No, just Canada is good. If the next generation wants to continue retracing the steps, they can.
They are taking over the world. I wouldn't mind visiting China at some point, but
It'd definitely be interesting, yeah.
really hard to be an activist in China,
Yeah.
we couldn't do this podcast over there.
Right, yeah. Human
Yeah.
rights are something that we need to keep bringing up. I noticed that human rights are taking a hit all over.
Yeah. Well, we'll be out of this country by the time they try to shut down our podcast. I think we'll be allowed to continue it in Canada for at least a few more years.
Yeah, we'll hide out in the
Until
woods.
the global dictatorship conquers everyone.
But at least weed is legal up there. I mean, that's pretty inspiring to have such a big
You'll like that.
To have such a big neighbor right on our northern border.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's going to be legal in this country soon, too. There's no way. Now that Canada's done it. Mexico's talking about doing it, too. If Mexico legalizes weed, that's a huge hit against all the cartels,
yeah, that would be so wonderful
Yeah.
if they just took the bottom out of the black market in Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah, the more that weed is legalized, the fewer people turn towards opiates. We've learned that in the states that have legalized. If Mexico does that, if the United States does that, legalizing weed, it's not just about cognitive liberty. It's really about helping end the opioid crisis. And speaking of that, the Ohio Board of Pharmacy
Has lost their mind.
they have just proposed putting kratom into Schedule 1 based on the most ridiculous misinformation. Wait, is it kratom or kratom?
I always said kratom, but I've also heard others say kratom.
Uh-huh.
Kratom, 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 kratom.
Let's call the whole thing off.
So the Board of Pharmacy supposedly they say they did some kind of study or survey, and they
Right.
received all of this bogus information.
Yeah. They heard back from whoever it was that they surveyed that the number one method of ingesting kratom is through intravenous injection. Okay, if you
It's
don't
baffling.
if you don't know what kratom is, everyone, kratom is a plant.
It's a plant.
it's a dried, powdered, chopped up plant, and when you try to mix that in water, it doesn't even dissolve. It's actually the worst part of kratom for me. I love the way it makes you feel. It's a little bit of an opioid, a little bit of a stimulant at the same time. You can't really overdose on it because you'll vomit if you take too much. No one's ever died from it. But the worst part of it is just, the taste. Like, you can throw up just tasting that. And you can't even, you try to dissolve in the water, but the powder doesn't dissolve. And so when you drink it, you still get all that powder. Like, there is no way anyone can inject kratom. But they used this information as part of their proposal to ban kratom in Ohio. And shame on them, because Ohio's the epicenter of the opioid crisis right now. And we need these mild herbal opiates, natural opiate plants, to help people detox, to help them come off of the synthetic opioids like heroin and fentanyl and the other things that they're doing right now. So, shame on the Ohio Board of Pharmacy.
Yeah, what is a Board of Pharmacy? Do all states have that? Is that a powerful
I don't even know. I just learned
office?
about it right now. They says right here on their website they're responsible for administering and enforcing laws governing the practice of pharmacy and the legal distribution of drugs. So
Well,
I guess
kratom
they think,
doesn't even have anything to do with a pharmacy. It's just
well, it's legal, and I guess they think it falls under their auspices then, and that they can just ban it.
No one's prescribing it. It's similar to like a tea or something like that.
guess
just
so.
a plant that people use in their daily life. It's more like a food type. I mean, it is a drug. Let's not say it's not a drug, but the form is a leaf.
Let's do a call to action.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's ask. We want to ask you to call the Ohio Board of Pharmacy and tell them not to place kratom on Schedule 1. That nobody injects kratom. That they're idiots. No, don't say that. Be polite. But this is really important, people. You can help save lives here. Click pause and call them right now. 614-466-4143. The Ohio Board of Pharmacy. 614-466-4143. Call them and tell them not to put kratom on the schedule.
Yeah, because kratom can really help a lot of people, and we shouldn't be decreasing the options.
That's right. Well, we talk a lot more about this in our Patreon subscriber podcast, Drug Nonsense. And so if you want to hear me rant more about the Ohio Board of Pharmacy, head over to patreon.com and subscribe.
And we have some new patron subscribers, and we're very, very grateful. We want to thank them.
That's right. We've got 5 new subscribers. So let's give a shout out to Joel, Boyce, James, Mariano, and Ben.
Yay!
Thank you guys. We appreciate and love you.
Thank you so much. You guys are making this possible for us.
All right. So, Tatiana, what did you think of my interview with Mike Power?
Wow, what an interesting project. He went all the way to China.
Whoa, what's that?
Oh, it's a new segment of people on drugs.
Yeah, it's our friend Ashley, who is smoking DMT for the first time. We are in a canoe on acid.
Magic mushroom.
MDMA.
She candy flipped last night.
The spider.
Colors everywhere.
Life is wonderful.
People on drugs.
Keep the flame on it. Hold it, blow it out and do another one.
It's like I forgot to breathe.
It's like electricity all over me.
Okay. I'm just watching a show. I love you, honey. I'm so glad. Thank you. Just like it's like, by the way, you're part of this environment. It's like they're accessorizing. You're accessorizing yourself everywhere in here. Oh, yes, am I.
Did it look like a painting at all?
It's like moving at the moment, by the way. It was almost 2D, and it was like cartoons or drawings that you would see, and then they were just like 2D, and they're just like moving everywhere around you. Like shapes, like this.
This is perfect, actually. I never even noticed that,
Except
but that's like...
These shapes. There was this one image of a woman with her, like her thumb in the air, and she was like, "You're having a great time right now." But she was pink. She was like, it was just the outline, and it was like this. I could feel the vibration of the electricity in the room, which was the weirdest thing. Like I was actually way too in tune with the electricity. Like I felt it on me. Wow. Life is wonderful.
Okay. So as I was saying, Mike Power.
That was fun.
Yeah. Very colorful.
All right, so back to Mike Power. This is an amazing interview, everyone. I read Mike's book a couple of years ago, Drugs Unlimited, and it blew me away. There are very few true investigative reporters in the world anymore.
Yeah, I really admire investigative journalists.
He digs deep, everything that he does. Did anything stand out for you?
Well, the adventure of it is really something notable. Going to China, going undercover, posing as... he had a cover for his cover. Do you know what I mean? Like he had one false identity and then he had to layer another on top of that in order to not reveal the...
Right.
It's a real adventure and it's a really interesting story. And I think Mike is... brave, he's creative, he's a talented writer, he's a great thinker, he's looking at questions that are really current concerns, like
Yeah.
what is
Yeah.
happening in this moment as things are changing so
Yep.
quickly in our society and
Yep.
across the globe. Things are changing fast. So having someone like him who's got a beat on it and he's diving in to take a look at this minute, what's up?
He is on the forefront of what's going on right now. Like, you want to know why MDMA is so cheap and so prevalent today? You're about to hear why. Let's get right into it. This is Mike Power from London. Mike, thank you very much for agreeing to the interview. I've been a fan of yours for a very long time, ever since I read your book, Drugs Unlimited.
Thank you so much. Well, the feeling's mutual. Emmanuel, I've been a fan of your work and the work of Dan Safe and all of the American harm reduction community from my very earliest days of involvement in the drug scene, in the international online drug scene. And every part of the drug culture, I think, has been informed, educated and improved by you guys. So it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's start with your recent article. It really made a giant impact. You actually went undercover to China and got the first ever hard evidence that there is a lot of MDMA and how easy it is to order it and ship it over the darknet.
Well, it was a kind of a culmination, really, of a 10-year investigation. It kind of started for me when, in 2008, when there was the huge kind of global MDMA drought, and that was evidenced by the United Nations. Their kind of drug seizure records showed that only 25% of kind of previous year's quantities of MDMA were being seized. And on the streets, just from anecdotal reports, users were saying that there was no ecstasy about. And it was a really interesting thing to me to see the world's most popular, the world's most favourite drug suddenly not available. That was back in 2008. And here we are in 2018. And in the UK now, the streets are awash.
I think it actually started a little bit before that, because it also paralleled a contraction of DanceSafe. There were a few years right around that time where we had only a national office, no active chapters at all. And then only a few years later, everything exploded again. And suddenly we had 30 chapters around the country.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, ecstasy waxes and wanes with the seasons and with the weather sometimes. But the thing that I went to China to do, it was to show that the ecstasy market has changed and to show that the ecstasy market is now industrialized. It's heavily industrialized. And we have, plants in Holland being discovered, super labs producing hundreds of tons of MDMA. So I wanted to know, how is this drug being made? Where is it coming from? Who is making it? And how is it being made? What's the chemical formula? Because things have changed. The chemicals used to make MDMA have changed. And so, I went to Shanghai, set up a very large precursor deal to buy the essential precursors to make MDMA.
Which is PMK, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of PMK. So you've got PMK, which is the sort of standard old school way of making it, or Safrole is another old school way of making it. And both of those chemicals are kind of fairly heavily watched. If you buy them, you're going to have the DEA kicking your door down. But I found out from a guy on the dark web that there's a new chemical, there's a new guy in town. It's called PMK glycidate, which is a solid version of PMK, which is normally a liquid. This is sold all over China. You can buy it from a good few dozen places. And so, I went undercover for 6 months and, I managed to convince them that I was a clandestine chemist and that I wanted to, make hundreds of millions of pounds worth of ecstasy. Well, $980 million worth of ecstasy, actually.
Did you tell them that right up front?
No, I didn't. I pretended that I was a perfumier from Bratislava, which I don't know where that came to me from, but I decided that was my cover. But it was to be frank, it was bullshit, and they knew it, and I knew it. This chemical is exclusively used to make ecstasy.
Exclusively, really? That's the only thing it's used for?
Kind of exclusively. There's some kind of small uses for it within blood pressure medicine, but it's a very old synthesis towards that, which is completely expensive and unnecessary. So there's a cover story for them. And their cover story is that they're a legitimate kind of pharmaceutical company. And my cover story is that I'm a perfumier from Bratislava. And both stories are as equally implausible as the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so if you can pose as an ecstasy manufacturer and get actually into the factory where they make and sell this drug, why wouldn't the DEA or, I don't know, Interpol, whoever the European organizations are that do, why wouldn't they be able to do it?
Well, I think that they probably haven't got quite as obsessive a nature as myself. You know, I'm an investigative journalist, and I decided to solve this problem. I decided to answer this question just to kind of square this circle, to understand why have things changed so much. Because, you know, 5 years ago in the UK, 10 years ago, a kilo of MDMA was £50,000, and that's like, you know, $70,000. And now in the UK, a kilo of MDMA, if you're on the dark web, you can buy it for like £4,000. You know,
4,000.
4,000.
That is dirt cheap.
It's ridiculously cheap. It's cheaper than cannabis. You know, it's cheaper than anything.
Wow.
And you know, I'm sure that your listeners are an informed bunch, but let's just remind ourselves that 1 gram of MDMA is kind of, you know, 8 doses on the Shulgin scale. Mm-hmm. So each kilo is what? What's that make? It's like 8,000 doses. You know, so right. it's ludicrously cheap. It's 50 pence a dose. In Britain, it's less than the price of a can of lager.
Wow.
Than a can of beer. So that's the reality that we're dealing with. And then the consequences of that reality are the ecstasy deaths in the UK have quintupled in the last 5 years.
Wait, so are you making a direct connection to the availability of MDMA and fatalities? Because I like to say it's about prohibition, the lack of education, the fact that people don't know proper dosing. Clearly, availability isn't the problem. It's availability in the context of prohibition that's the problem.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the key thing is that in Britain now we have a huge abundance, a mega abundance of super cheap MDMA with absolutely no public health intervention, no policy change. We don't have any enlightened government response to this. Right. And instead we have new users entering the market without the information and kind of education that you guys give and that I try to write in my books and articles.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, we can't deny that if there's more of something, then it will have more of an impact. And, you know, one of the impacts of ecstasy is death. Same as one of the impacts of traffic and the impacts of, you know, mountaineering. Things are dangerous. You know, we need to mitigate those risks. We need to reduce them, and we need to educate and inform people.
Right.
You know,
right.
Ultimately, I've always argued that ecstasy is a drug. It's an intoxicant, and it can kill you. But I would argue that the reason that it's more dangerous than it needs to be is because dosing isn't actually informed, behavior isn't informed, setting isn't informed. So, you know, we're on the same page on that.
Yep.
But equally, when you got more of a thing, it has more of an impact.
Right. Right. Okay, so I read your article, and I was it was gripping. It was like a spy novel, and I was rooting for you to get the final result, which is that you wanted some acknowledgement that they knew that the factory you were buying, they knew that you were going to be making ecstasy, and as soon as you got that information, you bolted and got out of it. That was your goal. Why was that so important? You knew it already. Right.
Absolutely. What was important to me, I mean, I was making a TV documentary as well, so we had hidden cameras. So, we needed the money shot. We needed the admission that they were completely complicit in this illegal international trade. We needed their confession on camera that they were dealing, in a corrupt way with the border states, with the borders of China, with the border agents kind of in Europe and in boats and in planes and stuff like this. So we needed to have that in order to kind of nail the story because, this is a legal chemical. It's sold for legal purposes for some people. But I just happen to know a bit about chemistry. So I know it's for MDMA. Mm-hmm. Plus, I've spoken to clandestine chemists who've confirmed to me that this is the new way that they're making MDMA.
Right.
So really, the way the story was written it was a departure for me, Emmanuel. I wrote it in the first person, which is for a writer that has never done that. I've never written a news piece or a kind of investigation in the first person in this way. But it was impossible not to do that, and so. To be honest, it was a very tense experience. I didn't really sleep from Friday till the Monday, and it was, it was high wire stuff.
Now,
it was
you must have worried about them discovering the hidden cameras, and you're in China, you're in a foreign country. Anything could have happened to you.
Well, yeah, and we were, we broke a few journalistic laws. I didn't tell the government I was there. I didn't tell the government of China I was working as a journalist there. So if any of the government of China is listening to this, I'm probably never going to be allowed back in the country. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, I don't have any great plans to do that in the coming years. I needed to do that in order to get the story. And sometimes when you're looking for a story as complex and as profitable as the center, the epicenter of the global MDMA precursor supply, you've got to break some eggs. And so, yeah, I did a lot of deep breathing exercises. I, put myself into sort of calmer states just through breathing and meditation. And I just, I leaned forward when my heart was beating so fast that I thought my shirt was going to wobble,
What were you more concerned about? The Chinese government raiding and catching you and you weren't there as a journalist, or the factory staff suspecting that you were from the DEA, say, and capturing you and doing whatever? Which was... Looking back, it's a hard question to answer from here. Looking back at the time, the only thing I wanted was to get the story. I wanted them to admit that they knew that I was buying this chemical to make this drug, because then my hypothesis was complete. The circle was closed. The circuit was made. And so... That's also what incriminates them, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, really the thing that I was most concerned about at the time was you're dealing with organized crime ultimately. If you look at who controls the global international MDMA supply, these are not nice people, which is, it's the argument that we all make that, you should not have organized criminals and gangsters running the supply. So, my real fear after the event when I was in my hotel was, maybe the real danger isn't today or tomorrow, but in 6 months' time, I don't know who's going to knock on my door. Who have I pissed off by showing this to be the case?
Well, you didn't actually name the factory.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But my face did appear in the articles, and it did appear on the documentary. So,
but you didn't put anyone at risk because you didn't name any names or locations.
Oh no. I was judicious in that. But equally,
I think you're safe.
Yeah, I certainly do. I think, this kind of work, I think as well, when you look at the conclusion of my piece, which is that really the problem isn't the chemicals, it isn't the gangsters, it's the fact that the government refuses to legislate properly for the consumption of this fairly safe drug. Yeah, I think we can agree that it's a fairly safe drug. We're not going to say it's completely safe. No drug is completely safe. If you look at
it's fairly safe and it's highly beneficial both for the individual and for society, particularly compared to the legal drugs, alcohol, and tobacco.
Well, yeah, I'll agree with you on that one. Publicly, I think that ecstasy is a much more positive influence on society than alcohol or tobacco or cocaine or pretty much any drug. Cannabis, I think, is a really useful tool for relaxation. We live in late capitalism. People need to chill out. People need to connect and not just blot things out with alcohol and, hype things up with cocaine. It's like, right. I think that most people benefit from, a small dose of ecstasy every so often. I think it's quite a positive experience. I don't mind going on the record saying that.
I think the biggest problem is that people don't understand that MDMA has a threshold and a ceiling. There's a proper dose that's, for most people, somewhere in between 70 and, say, 180 milligrams in a given night. It's not like cocaine where you can keep taking small bumps throughout the night. And it's unusual in that regard because most other drugs, alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, you take a little bit, you get high, you take more, you get higher. And there's a giant range where you can do that. And so I think people get used to drugs working that way and they end up taking too much MDMA. There isn't enough of an educational campaign that says, no, you have to stay within this threshold in order to have a positive experience.
Well, absolutely. And this is one of the issues that we're facing in the UK right now. Less is more with MDMA. If you do more than 250 milligrams of MDMA, you're not going to remember the last, couple of hours of the night. You might end up having trouble taking a piss. You might end up, not understanding what your friends are saying. You might end up being incredibly annoying to everyone around you because you can't talk and your jaw's swinging wildly, Right. That's how it might be. Those are the kind of consequences of extreme use. But now what we have in Britain and in Europe is this normalization of superdosed pills where we have pills at 250, 270, 280 milligrams in a single pill. And, right. Young kids have been dying in their droves in the UK in this summer. We've had, several deaths at festivals of people who've dropped pills with 300 milligrams in them. Right. 300 milligrams of MDMA in a single tablet. Yeah. And the kids are buying them for £4 each. That's $6 each.
Yeah, that's crazy. And, there's an interesting phenomenon where The Loop, an excellent harm reduction organization, and Fiona Masham runs it, puts out warnings when they discover pills like this. But a side effect of that is that those pills become much higher demand. Everyone wants the 300 milligram pills now when The Loop makes an announcement, and it serves as advertising for the manufacturers. Of course, that doesn't mean that The Loop should not be putting out those warnings. They have to. But it does underscore the fact that harm reduction will never be able to succeed in the context of prohibition. We really need the legal regulation of these substances in order to save lives.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that once we actually have a regulated and controlled and properly, a properly managed market and a properly managed culture of drugs, then we'll just see huge advances in public health. Because, I think you and I agree that drug use is an individual choice, but it does have public health implications. And so how do we manage those two things? How do we balance those two things? Through proper education and through a proper control of the supply and dosage and usage of this, as we say, this relatively benign and, positive chemical.
Right. Well, let's go back to your article. So it made a big splash. What was the fallout? What impact did it have? Anything interesting to say about the repercussions of it?
Yeah, sure. I had a few people threaten my life. I had a few people, just hit my inboxes and just do all kinds of weird digital stuff. Nothing too untoward and nothing more than any journalist faces online nowadays. I think this is something that people don't consider, that journalists now, as part of their daily work, we face threats, intimidation, bullying, and digital violence. Ultimately, is what it is. It's threats of violence.
Those were people misunderstanding your motivations or thinking that somehow your article spurred on more intensive enforcement against MDMA.
You get all sorts. The University of Idiots is a very broad church.
Right.
You get an awful lot of idiots in the world, and there's absolutely no barrier for them to contact you and tell you how much of a fool they think you are.
What about positive results from it?
Oh yeah, I had some great positive results from it. I've got some great commissions from it, and I've got a piece which will be out next year in Playboy magazine, which is a kind of a longer, deeper investigation into the whole supply chain, and then kind of a more US specific angle on that. So
right.
I shouldn't talk too much about that because I'm under contract there. But that's a piece that I really
good.
Look forward to producing in the next few months. The fallout of it's been good. It was a piece that I did for German TV, and the guys at the German TV company were just so supportive, and they were really, really cool, and they enabled us to do that story, and they were generous with their funds and their time. And then beyond that, for me, it's just enabled me to gather more material, which I'm at the moment trying to marshal into a kind of a book-shaped form. I've got so much information now around, the kind of stuff that you cover, actually, the secret history of MDMA and so many different things. When you're researching a story like this, you end up with so much extra material which can be used in so many different ways.
Right.
So for me, one of the best impacts for it has been that it's confirmed to me that I have a lifelong fascination with this drug and with this culture and with the whole area of drug policy and harm reduction. So it really it just really kind of recharged my batteries, really, speaking personally, to get the piece out and to answer the question that nobody had even asked, which was, why is efficacy so strong? Why is it so cheap? Why is it so available? And I answered all those questions.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I appreciate your work. I think it's so important. I have no idea why anyone would threaten your life over it. I just want to tell anyone out there, read Mike's book, Drugs Unlimited, and you will understand Mike is an ally in our cause and would never put anyone at risk or do anything to cause harm to anyone. So
absolutely not.
Thank you. Yeah. The truth is always an important thing to put out. It only leads to greater positivity.
Do you know, the only motivation I have in the stories I write is to give a voice to people who don't have a voice. And I think the drug users, in many cases, don't have a voice. And to me, that's inadmissible. The fact that people who use drugs do not have a kind of a public profile other than, a negative one. I mean, normal people use drugs. It's as simple as
Right.
that. And, it's like normal people use drugs, your teachers use drugs, your local cop uses drugs. And we've got this huge kind of stigma around it. And I want to demystify that stigma. And I want to just deconstruct the prejudices and bullshit around around drug policy. That's my goal.
Right. Well, I have a big voice, and I'm trying to speak for the drug user. And I actually did drugs with a cop at Burning Man this year.
Fantastic. Which drugs did you do at Burning Man with the cop?
Well, we were on different drugs at the time. I was on LSD at the time.
And what was he on?
I think he was on 1P LSD or ALD. So it was a LSD-like drug.
And that's beautiful, isn't it? Because, the cops got to do what he wanted to do, which was get high, and he stayed within the bounds of the law because, those drugs, I mean, maybe not in the US, but, in certain parts of the world, those drugs are illegal. And I think, in a few years' time, in maybe in a decade's time or so, we'll look back on these conversations and we'll laugh because what's wrong with someone dropping acid, really? And in a controlled and enjoyable way, what's wrong with consenting psychedelic use? I really don't see any problem with it. With consenting adult use of psychedelics, that's for people to decide. Maybe there can come problems later down the line, and maybe there become some benefits later down the line.
We are discovering benefits of psychedelics now. One of the most impressive new studies is that psychedelics may actually cause dendritic growth, the holy grail of neurogenesis, and have use in treating neurodegenerative disorders. Could prevent dementia, maybe even help in a cure for multiple sclerosis. So, I'll tell you, but I like to say, I've said it before on the show, my wife and I love doing a threshold dose of LSD once a week, about 30 mics. We go out for a hike. You can still tie your shoes. It just makes things a little bit colorful. And I do feel that it's a cognitive enhancer, that taking that, day once a week to get out into nature with a threshold psychedelic dose, I think it's doing wonderful things for my brain and my life.
I live in London, and I just heard that version of your weekends, and I'm so jealous. It sounds so cool.
we are lucky where we live. We live in the mountains of California. So. Okay, so, your decision to go to China actually was an outgrowth, like you mentioned, 10 years of studying why is MDMA so cheap and available. And really, that's because of the darknet, right? I mean, I learned a lot about the darknet from reading your book. I had never been on the darknet before I read it, actually. So what can you tell us? What has been the growth in drug sales over the darknet since it's appeared?
Well, okay, right now I'm looking at Dream Market, which is it's an online market, which I'm sure some of your readers will know and frequent.
You're on it right now, you're saying?
I'm looking at the page right now,
okay.
And I'm looking at the number of drugs for sale is 65,568 different drugs for sale. Okay. Now, this is one market which has got 65,000 different deals. Now, it's a slightly false figure because not every single one of those is for an individual drug from an individual dealer. But let's just look at there are 10,790 ecstasy deals on there. There are, let's see, for psychedelics, 4,367. There's 20,000 cannabis deals on there. Opiates, 5,000. What else we got? Significant stimulants, 11,000. So that includes cocaine. So, the whole spectrum of drugs is available there. It's difficult to say how much it's grown, but it's enormous. It's absolutely enormous. It's enormous now. It's how, a good quarter of the United Kingdom, for example.
And that's just one market, right?
That's one market. And, I know of at least, I haven't counted for years. I think it's at one point when I checked, there were 25 different markets.
Now, I remember about 6 months ago reading a story about the feds busting one market where they actually took it over and kept running it for a month in order to entrap some people. And in the words of the writer, to actually send a chill through the darknet customers who now have to worry whether or not the market they're using is actually controlled by the feds. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Well, I think that a really interesting guy a number of years ago, I'm not going to name him, but he's a major psychedelic evangelist and a major psychedelic supplier on the dark web. He'll be famous to many people that know this market. And he said to me, we must operate at all times as if we are moving through enemy territory. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, I treat every market as compromised. I treat every communication as being intercepted. And I treat every transaction as being as if I'm dealing with a cop. And I said, okay, that's fascinating. Tell me more. He said, I encrypt everything all the time. Yeah. He said, I use only Bitcoin. I only tumble my coins, and I deal only with anonymous people. I will never meet anybody, and I only sell acid. Yeah. But he happens to sell, tens of grams of acid at a time, 100 grams of acid, So we're talking about people with very, very strong connections to the global synthesis markets. And I think that that's the case. When Hansa Market was taken over, as you say, the police took it over because the guys that ran it were foolish enough to also run a kind of an ebook pirating site that they took Bitcoin payments on.
Right. It's always some really silly mistake that they made when you hear about this stuff. Yeah.
They weren't operating as if they were in occupied enemy territory. Yeah. And it's like, if if people that listen to your show, if they're buying from darknet markets, and if they're always using encryption and they're always maintaining good operational security, then I think that they're flying below the radar. If you are buying your drugs from somebody who has had their account, a vendor who's had their account taken over by the police, then you don't really have a chance. But I mean, I really think that kind of darknet markets, I think that people would be best advised, if they wanted to use them, just for small personal quantities of drugs. If they're going to use them, don't get greedy. Don't start trying to make money buying and selling drugs.
Right.
Don't do that. I think that's I think that's greedy. And as soon as you put money into any situation, you end up with bad outcomes. And in my experience in life, that's always the way.
Right. I think even the people who have been busted, at least in the States, for buying small quantities, haven't gotten huge prison sentences. I know in California now, a couple years ago, we passed Prop 47, which makes possession for personal use only a misdemeanor. It's almost a decriminalization here in California.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that the darknet markets are almost a kind of proof of concept of how people will behave in a controlled and regulated market, because the quality is reviewed by people who are using it themselves and giving feedback. So we have a kind of control in the quality of the supply, and then we also have a kind of a regulation in the kind of the quantities of drugs that are being sold to a degree. Mm-hmm. So I kind of think that in terms of people's behavior, what's most interesting to me about the darknet is it reveals people's behavior if they can buy any drug, because right now I could quite easily buy. And you could quite easily buy 1 kilo of heroin. Yeah, you could buy that now if you wanted to on the dark web, not without a great deal of difficulty. But what moral questions does that actually kind of expose? Should we be buying kilos of heroin? Should we be selling kilos of heroin to strangers? Should we accept that this is something in our society that we don't intervene in? I personally don't think it's very positive.
Right.
But what then shall we say? The darknet sort of shows how people behave, and in the main, people are behaving fairly sensibly. But what is bothering me is that we have just this kind of unregulated ecstasy market with people not knowing how to use drugs in the wisest way possible and in the safest way possible, which is why organizations like yours and work by people like yourself it's so important to actually inform people and go, look, here's the limits, here's the rules, here's the boundaries, rather than just saying everything's banned and you go to jail if you buy it.
Right.
We know that that's not true. We know people are going to buy it. We need some true boundaries. We need some true guidelines for people which actually keep them safe or safer and keep them alive. That's my only conclusion on the kind of emergence of the dark web. But it's going to play out forever, unless you shut down the internet, unless you shut down, electricity.
Right.
Then you're not going to shut down the darknet, Bitcoin, Tor encryption, and the Royal Mail or the U.S. Postal Service.
Right. Well, one point you made in your book, which has always stuck with me, and I say it now when I speak publicly all the time, is that if we legally regulated the classic psychedelics, say, LSD, mushrooms, cactus, MDMA, a handful of others that have a tried and true track record of relative safety, cannabis obviously, then we would dramatically shrink the markets for K2, spice, and all these other so-called research chemicals, which most people are taking only because they either don't show up on a drug test or because they're one of the small minority of serious psychonauts. But the vast majority of people They just want to get high with the classic kind of stuff. They want to have a trippy experience with mushrooms or LSD, or the loved up experience with MDMA, or the relaxation with cannabis. And so even though these dark nets are still going to be around with all these other drugs available, we would probably reduce the sales of many of them if we just made the others legal.
People want good drugs, don't they? And all of the other drugs that you just mentioned, they're like, they're really bad stand-ins. They're terrible substitutes. And what's interesting in the 10 years since, how many years is it since the book came out? 2013, 2014 in the US. So it's kind of 4 or 5 years. The markets in the UK for those kind of substitute drugs for the RCs that were starting to kind of climb into prominence, it's absolutely minimized them. And people can now and do just, they buy the drugs that they want, which are, MDMA, LSD, 2CB has become very popular.
One of my favorites.
In the UK. What was it, the magical half dozen? Did Sasha call it? The magical half dozen, I think it was, wasn't it?
What's that? Wait, what's half dozen? I don't remember hearing that.
That was, that's Alexander Shulgin talked about the magical half dozen. And that was his kind of 6 favorite drugs that he discovered out of all of the different
do you remember which 6 of those were?
Yeah, 2CE, 2CB, MDMA, MDA. And then I'd have to go back to PCAL and take a look, but it's been a few years. But yeah, the magical half dozen. I think that'd be a great. A great strand to go and look into.
Well, he can't take credit for MDMA or MDA, but he can take credit for 2CB. And I have heard many people say, including myself, that they believe that was his best invention.
It's an interesting experience, isn't it? I think it's one that many people, again, it's the dose, it's like if many people were to experience that at the lower levels of dose of between 5 to 10 milligrams and have an evening, socializing with friends or hanging out with their partner, then they probably have a really enjoyable and quite safe time.
Even at higher doses, it's very colorful, very visual, easy. You don't have the psychological precariousness that you do with LSD. And then after 4 or 5 hours, you're completely normal again. There's no hangover. You're back to baseline.
And that's definitely true. But as well, you got to remember that you're ahead, man. You're ahead. You've got a lot of experience in this. And,
that's true.
If you were to take, Joe Schmo just down on, I can't even think of the American equivalent of the Clapham Omnibus, which is our phrase in Britain. If you were to just take a regular guy who worked in an office and suddenly dropped 15 milligrams of 2CB as his first drug experience, I'm sure he'd find it probably quite enjoyable, but there would be some challenging moments for him. But I think that low dose mushrooms is the kind of thing. I tell you what's really fascinating to me in the US at the minute is this kind of cannabis beverages, where Heineken and people like Lagunitas are selling like cannabis drinks with like 2 milligrams of THC in it. So it's kind of a social tonic. So you can go to a party and have a soda that's got 2 milligrams of THC in, which is just enough to notice. And what an interesting new strand in intoxication that we now have, kind of liquid, refreshing cannabis drinks. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. All right. Well, back to the darknet. So you're saying that just the proliferation of the darknet has brought the better quality, safer drugs to the surface, and fewer of the RCs are being bought.
Absolutely. It's killed the market in RCs.
How can you tell that?
You can tell it by the number of sales. And if you look at the sales of research chemicals, they're low. And if you look at the sales of ecstasy, they're high. It's like if you take a look at, next time you on the darknet market, go and filter the UK ecstasy dealers and just take a look at the kind of numbers there. You're looking at people with, 20,000 sales, 40,000 sales.
And you can actually see where they've sold to, or you can see where their location is, and predominantly they're selling within their own country. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can see where they're selling from, you can see where they're selling to. And then if you go into the feedback, which I often do, I'll sort of scroll down and I'll search for US, or I'll search for kind of East Coast or West Coast. And, there's an awful lot of drugs entering the US from the UK right now. It's the DA know that, the FBI know that, and they're probably monitoring every phone call and internet connection they can to do so. Right. Whether or not they've actually got the resources to prosecute anyone, everyone that's doing it, I don't know. But yeah, the market in research chemicals has dropped. As well as that, I monitor online chatter, I monitor forums, I monitor Twitter, I monitor as many different kind of places as I can where people discuss drugs, and people are just delighted that the ecstasy is back and that it's cheap and it's strong and they can buy as much of it as they possibly want because of the new chemicals that I've written about. So yeah, the darknet continues to be a disruptive force and a kind of a very innovative, modernizing force in the drug culture, which I don't really think that even people who've read my book, if they haven't really carried on watching what's happening in the market, to see the development and the innovation in the last few years, it's been endless. The way that the way the market's grown is it's insane to witness the growth in the darknet. I mean, I've seen. There was a gang in England who just in the space of 3 months made like $300,000, making $100,000 a month selling fentanyl. Now, nobody really wants fentanyl, but they were selling it.
Now, didn't Dream Market ban fentanyl?
I don't know that they did. I'd need to go and look. It's the kind of thing I think they would do. I know that they banned gun sales. I mean, all these markets who will, do an exit scan and then another one appears. But you can sort of see the heritage and the lineage of the code. If you look at I'm no expert in code, but I can see just by the way that things are set up and the kind of categorization and the taxonomy on these markets, a lot of the same guys are involved, I think, from one market to the next. And why wouldn't they be? There aren't that many super encryption experts in hosting hidden services. There just aren't that many,
right?
In the world. So, there are guys out there who are going to make a lot of money. There are guys out there who are probably going to kill each other over this. There are guys out there who are going to end up in jail for the rest of their lives and probably never see their children. And to me, that's, I'm talking about the market operators here. Yeah. And that, to me, that's a risk they're taking. And, they're being handsomely rewarded for it. But let's not kid ourselves. These are not heroes of anti-prohibition. These are money makers. These are money guys. They want money, and, they're taking a huge risk. And I'm not going to say whether or not they deserve their profits. They're taking a risk, and they're making that risk and that calculation for themselves. Right. But it's a huge market. It's a massive market.
Right. Let me let you listen right now to an interview I did with the current executive director of DanceSafe, Mitchell Gomez, who gives his views on the darknet drug markets.
Sure thing.
The dark web as a system is not going away. At the same time, I think that the dark web is as problematic as prohibition, because you have a system where a 13-year-old with his parents' credit card can get MDMA and LSD delivered to an older friend's house. You have a system where anyone, regardless of their mental health, regardless of their criminal background, regardless of what they have done in their lives, can just go online and order kilos of cocaine to be delivered to their home. And I don't think that this is an ideal model for what legalization or regulation should look like. It is, however, something that is forcing us as a society to have a conversation about prohibition, because it seems like technology is making prohibition obsolete.
What do you think about that?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if we look at some of the consequences of the darknet and the kind of democratization of extreme criminality that it enables, we can't see that as a positive thing, but we can also not, through our moral judgment of that, stop it existing. So we can't do that. We have to accept reality, and then we have to change it for the better. That's our role as, as concerned citizens, which we both are. I mean, you're talking about young people getting online and buying drugs. I really don't think in the modern age, young children should be using, kids of 13 and 12 should be using computers unsupervised, never mind encrypted connections and never mind carrying out cryptocurrency transactions. That's bad parenting. That's not bad technology. That's really bad parenting.
Your child's only 5 years old. Wait till they become 13 and just try to stop them from unsupervised computer use.
But, going back to the darknet and going back to the dark web and the comments from your colleague there, yep. I think that it's true that the darknet, it lowers the barrier to entry for criminality. This is something that I've said in various sort of public speeches and kind of lectures that I've given, which is that, anyone that wanted to be a cocaine dealer 20 years ago needed to be a gangster. Now all you need is a letterbox, and that's it. You can be a cocaine dealer in a week. All you need is a few guys to throw in some money, and you can buy some high-grade cocaine, cut it, and then sell it, and then you've got some more capital, and then buy more.
And virtually and virtually risk-free, because prior to the darknet, you'd have to get a bunch of dealers below you who all could get busted wear a wire, and then you're going to get busted. But now you don't need people below you. You just drop it off at the post office.
Absolutely. So, technology changes society. And then I think it's our responsibility as interested political people to change society for the better and to keep abreast of this technology and to understand the changes that it's making and to say, great, so excellent. Anyone that wants to score drugs can score drugs. Well, some people are going to applaud that. I'm not going to applaud it completely. I'm just going to report on it and say that the consequences of that are as follows. And some of them are positive and some of them are negative. And we need to move beyond just the typical dogma of pro-legalization and the typical dogma of prohibition. Because between the two poles, that's where we're going to find good policy that keeps people safe and that acknowledges people's, innate, I would argue, desire to get high.
Right. It's a double-edged sword, obviously, and truth is always in a gray area. I really hate this debate between hardcore prohibitionists and the libertarians who only have one solution and don't even want regulation over alcohol. I lived in in Nicaragua for a year that lacks a regulatory authority, and there was about 20 to 30 people within a week who died because they purchased alcohol from someone who was actually selling isopropyl alcohol, didn't know the difference. And that's what happens when you don't have regulation. So, I like to say that libertarians generally are people who have never had children. Because if you have children, you realize you have to control what they do. Kids will, if you don't control what they eat, they will eat sugar and die. They will only eat sweet things, and they will die because they lack the ability to delay gratification. They don't understand things. And the same is with teenagers and even people, young adults, we need to create regulation to protect ourselves. Not everyone is nor can even the best of us, responsible people, be perfectly safe if a society had no government regulation. So it's just a matter of what things should we be regulating and what things we shouldn't. And I think we should all be able to agree that we need to regulate substances that are dangerous.
Not only dangerous, they're also powerfully reinforcing. They're self-reinforcing. So if you have a drug like cocaine, it gives you pleasure, but it will actually self-reinforce, so that it makes you want to take more of it. Same with ecstasy. It's like, it's a fantastic experience. Why would you do that and think, okay, great, I've experienced it, I'm now done with it? Why would you take ecstasy and think, excellent, one time was enough? You're not going to think.
There's a few people like that. But people usually want to repeat the experience. But the good thing about ecstasy compared to cocaine is that it has a self-limiting effect. You really can't take it too often or too much, or it doesn't work. So that's
absolutely. But I think that the thing is that it's like in terms of the cultural impact of drugs. The cultural impact of drugs, I think, that needs to be managed is that. How do you live after ecstasy? How do you live after that first earth-shattering moment when you experience, the complete connection with yourself and with other people and the lack of judgment and the kind of, the freedom from ego? How do you then how do you integrate yourself back into society, which doesn't value those experiences? How do you do that? And that's the kind of thing that I'm really fascinated by, which is the kind of the philosophy of illicit drug markets. How do we teach our kids? It's cool to get high, but you can't do it all the time. You can't even think that that's the best thing in your life. For me, the greatest experiences I've had in my life have been off drugs. It's like, and I'm not going to tell you how wonderful my child is or how wonderful nature is or any of that shit because we all know it. But it's like there's the longevity of true, deep, heavy emotional connection with other human beings on ecstasy is something I think that it's a huge kind of thing for society to manage once it becomes legal. What are we going to do? How are people going to just do that on a Friday and then go to work on a Monday and then sit in a meeting with people that they hate and go, you know what? I understand why you're being that way, man. How are they gonna? How is society gonna survive once everyone gets enlightened?
Well, it's already happening now. MDMA is widely available. I think this movement for integration circles, I know across the states, they're everywhere now. Psychedelic societies putting the word out that to come and meet once a month, whatever, with a group of people so we can discuss our psychedelic experiences and actually integrate them. Like meditation, I think it's the same thing. When you have these inner experiences, whether they're drugs, meditation, spiritual experiences, they're not complete teachers in and of themselves. There's a necessary step of speaking with a community of peers and coming to an appropriate interpretation of the meaning of them. That integration is essential to learn from and improve the beneficial effects.
Absolutely. I think that kind of thing happens informally, doesn't it, in many circles? I mean, I'd be fascinated to hear more about these more formal versions that you're talking about. I mean, on a personal basis, I think I'd find that kind of confronting and difficult, but that's just my own kind of nature. But I think a lot of people would really, really benefit from that. I think that America's kind of leagues ahead in terms of all of this stuff.
We started the drug war, and we're going to end the drug war. That's what I say.
You absolutely are.
Well, thanks for being on the show. Why don't you tell people both where they can read your last main article where you go undercover, and also how people can get your book? I know there's 2 titles, one for the U.S.
Sure thing. Well, my book in the UK is called Drugs 2.0, and in the US it's called Drugs Unlimited. And I have an online portfolio. It is mikepower.pressfolios.com. And if you go to my Twitter handle, my Twitter page is Mr. Michael Power. So you'll find me on Twitter under Mr. Michael Power, and you can find my latest thoughts and my latest stories are always tweeted there. And then my undercover story for Mix Mag is on there about when I go to Shanghai on the MDMA sting. And there's a whole load of stuff on my Press Folios page. So if you search for Mike Power and Press Folios, you'll find everything I've written in the last few months.
Great. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure as always. Nice one. All the best, Emmanuel.
That was part 1 of my interview with Mike Power, everyone. If you like that, you can listen to part 2 on our Patreon. Go to patreon.com, and for $3, you can subscribe and hear not only part 2 of this amazing interview, but all of our episodes of our other podcast, Drug Nonsense. Also, if you're listening to this on the web, we want to ask you to figure out how to use a podcast app and actually subscribe to us. You can subscribe via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. There's a lot of different apps out there where you can subscribe to us. So please subscribe. It's the new wave, everyone. It's the future. All the young people know how to do what they're doing already. Get with the program. And leave us a review. Leave us a 5-star review. It helps us get exposure. Thank you.